The World Before the War, Prelude to Chaos. The year was 1919. The world had just survived the bloodiest conflict in human history, the Great War. Millions were dead, empires had fallen, and nations were broken beyond repair. People called it the war to end all wars, but that was an illusion. The peace that followed was fragile, built on bitterness, revenge, and humiliation. The fire of war had only been buried under ashes. It would not stay quiet for long. In Europe, the Treaty of Versailles was signed. It was meant to bring peace, but instead planted the seeds of future conflict. Germany, once proud and powerful, was forced to accept full blame for the war. Heavy reparations crushed its economy. Its army was reduced to almost nothing, and its people were left humiliated. The German people felt betrayed and abandoned, and the resentment grew year by year. In Italy, veterans who had fought for glory returned home to poverty and political chaos. They felt cheated by the peace treaties that gave them little reward. In Japan, ambition began to grow. The empire had helped the Allies in the Great War, but now it wanted recognition, power, and control over Asia and the Pacific. Around the world, national pride turned into nationalism, and nationalism soon turned into anger. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the United States of America watched from a distance. The nation had sent millions of men to fight in Europe, but after the war, it wanted nothing to do with the world's problems. Americans were tired of bloodshed. They wanted peace, work, and stability. The government turned inward. Isolation became the new policy. The people believed that the oceans would protect them from the troubles of Europe and Asia. Then, in 1929, the world's strongest economy collapsed. The Great Depression began with the crash of the New York Stock Exchange. Banks failed overnight, industries shut down, and millions lost their jobs. The once booming cities of America were filled with long lines of hungry people waiting for food. Homeless families wandered the streets with no hope. The Great Depression did not just destroy wealth, it broke spirits. The economic crisis was not limited to America. It spread across the world. In Germany, inflation skyrocketed. A loaf of bread that once cost a few marks now cost thousands. People carried money in baskets, only to find it worthless the next day. Poverty and hopelessness consumed an entire generation. It was in this chaos that dangerous leaders found their opportunity. In Germany, a man named Adolf Hitler rose from obscurity. A failed artist and a soldier of the previous war, he now promised the German people something no one else could: pride and revenge. He told them he would restore Germany's glory, create jobs, and destroy the enemies who had humiliated them. The crowds believed him. They cheered for him. They followed him blindly. In Italy, Benito Mussolini seized power and built his fascist regime. He promised to rebuild the Roman Empire and turn Italy into a powerful nation once again. In Japan, military generals began to take control of the government. They believed Japan had a divine right to rule over Asia and the Pacific. These three nations, Germany, Italy, and Japan, would later form the Axis powers. While dictators strengthened their armies, democracies remained weak and divided. The League of Nations, created to prevent war, proved powerless. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, the League condemned the attack but did nothing to stop it. When Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, again the world remained silent. Hitler watched and learned that no one would stop him. Meanwhile, in the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt faced his own battle. The country was suffering from the Depression, and his focus was on rebuilding the economy through his New Deal reforms. Factories were restarted, jobs were created, and faith in government slowly returned. But when Roosevelt was asked about the rising tensions in Europe, he stayed cautious. The American people wanted peace, not another foreign war. The pain of World War I was still fresh in their memories. As the 1930s went on, the world grew darker. In 1936, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland, directly violating the Treaty of Versailles. Britain and France protested, but again did nothing. Encouraged, Hitler continued. He annexed Austria in 1938 without firing a single shot. The world watched nervously as the German army marched through Vienna, welcomed by cheering crowds. Next, Hitler demanded the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia where many Germans lived. Britain and France were desperate to avoid war. Their leaders met Hitler in Munich and agreed to give him what he wanted, believing it would secure peace. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned to London declaring peace for our time, but it was not peace, it was surrender. Within months, Hitler took the rest of Czechoslovakia. His appetite for power could not be satisfied. He wanted more land, more control, and revenge against those who had once defeated Germany. He signed a secret pact with the Soviet Union, agreeing to divide Poland between them. The world was heading toward disaster. On September 1st, 1939, the disaster arrived. At dawn, German tanks rolled into Poland. Bombs fell from the sky, cities were destroyed, and civilians fled in terror. The world once again found itself at war. Britain and France declared war on Germany 2 days later. World War II had begun. Across the ocean, the United States still remained neutral. Roosevelt and his government tried to keep the country out of direct conflict, but they knew that isolation could not last forever. The fall of Europe would mean the rise of tyranny everywhere. Roosevelt began to prepare quietly. He called on the nation to become the arsenal of democracy. American factories began to produce weapons, ammunition, and planes to support Britain and its allies. The sleeping giant was not yet fighting, but it was beginning to stir. In 1940, France fell to the Nazis in just 6 weeks. Britain stood alone against the German war machine. German planes bombed London day and night in what became known as the Blitz. Children were sent away from the cities, families hid in underground shelters, and the world watched as Britain refused to surrender. Roosevelt admired their courage. He knew that if Britain fell, the world would lose its last barrier against fascism. The United States began to send even more aid, food, weapons, and ships to help Britain survive. But the American people were still deeply divided. Many believed the war in Europe was not America's fight. They remembered the graves of World War I and wanted no part of another global conflict. Roosevelt had to move carefully, preparing for war while promising peace. Far across the Pacific, another power was watching closely. The Japanese Empire had been expanding for years, taking over parts of China and Southeast Asia. They needed oil, rubber, and steel to fuel their growing military, and much of that came from trade with the United States. When the U.S. imposed economic sanctions to stop Japan's aggression, tension began to rise. Japan saw America not as a trading partner anymore, but as an obstacle to its dreams of empire. By the end of 1941, the world was burning on 3 continents. Europe was under Nazi control, Africa was a battleground, and Asia was under invasion. America was still trying to stay out of the war, but it was becoming clear that soon it would have no choice. The storm was moving closer to its shores. The stage was set. The old world had collapsed under the weight of pride, greed, and fear. New powers had risen, ruthless, determined, and ready for conquest. Across the Pacific, Japan was preparing a strike that would change history forever. The next chapter of the world's greatest conflict was about to begin.
The spark. War erupts in Europe. When German troops stormed across the Polish border on September 1, 1939, the world witnessed the birth of a new kind of war. It was fast, brutal, and merciless. The Germans called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. It combined tanks, airplanes, and infantry in one unstoppable force. Within days, Polish cities were engulfed in fire. Civilians fled their homes. Refugees filled the roads. Within 3 weeks, Poland was crushed from both sides as the Soviet Union invaded from the east under its secret pact with Hitler. The world had changed overnight. Britain and France declared war on Germany, but they were not ready to fight. Their armies were small, their equipment old, and their morale uncertain. For months, Europe entered a strange silence, a period that came to be known as the Phony War. There were few battles, but everyone knew the storm was coming. Inside Germany, Hitler was celebrating his victory. The invasion of Poland had been swift and complete. He had proven to his generals and his people that Germany was strong again. The German military machine, rebuilt in secret for years, was now the most powerful in Europe. With each victory, Hitler's confidence grew. He began to look westward, toward France and Britain. In Britain, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, who had once promised peace for our time, now faced the reality of war. The British government began to prepare for air raids, building shelters and organizing evacuations. Thousands of children were sent from the cities to the countryside for safety. The British people braced themselves for what was coming, though few could imagine how terrible it would be. In France, the army waited behind the Maginot Line, a massive wall of concrete forts and bunkers built along the German border. The French believed it was impenetrable. They thought the line would protect them as they had protected themselves in World War I. But war had changed. Hitler would not attack where they were strongest. By the spring of 1940, Hitler's plan was ready. First, he turned north. In April, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. The world watched as German paratroopers dropped from the skies and naval forces swept across the North Sea. Norway fell quickly, giving Germany control over vital shipping routes and iron resources. Denmark surrendered almost immediately. Then came the real blow. In May 1940, Hitler launched his assault on Western Europe. German tanks rolled into Belgium and the Netherlands. Civilians panicked, and cities fell one after another. The French army rushed to help Belgium, believing the main attack was there. But Hitler had a different plan. His armored divisions secretly moved through the Ardennes forest, a region the Allies had thought impassable. On May 10, 1940, German tanks burst out of the forest and drove straight toward the French coast. The Allies were trapped. The German advance was so fast that entire divisions were surrounded before they even knew what was happening. In less than 2 weeks, the German army reached the English Channel. The British Expeditionary Force and thousands of French soldiers were cut off in a small coastal town called Dunkirk. The situation seemed hopeless. Surrounded by German forces, the Allies faced total destruction. But then came one of the most remarkable moments in modern history, the miracle of Dunkirk. As the German army closed in, Britain launched a desperate evacuation. Hundreds of naval ships, fishing boats, and even small civilian vessels crossed the channel under heavy fire to rescue the trapped soldiers. For 9 days, they carried more than 330,000 men to safety. Britain had lost its weapons and equipment, but it had saved its army. France was not so fortunate. German forces continued their relentless advance. On June 10th, Italy joined the war on Germany's side, attacking France from the south. Within days, the French defense collapsed. On June 14th, German troops marched into Paris. The French government surrendered soon after. The French people watched in despair as German soldiers paraded down the Champs-Élysées. The world's strongest military power had fallen in just 6 weeks. Europe now belonged to Hitler. Only Britain stood free, isolated and vulnerable. But Hitler did not stop. He believed Britain would soon make peace. He offered terms: complete surrender or destruction. Winston Churchill, who had replaced Chamberlain as Prime Minister, refused. He told his people, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender." Hitler responded with fury. If Britain would not surrender, he would crush it from the air. The Battle of Britain began in the summer of 1940. The Luftwaffe launched wave after wave of bombers against British cities, airfields, and factories. The goal was to destroy Britain's air force and force the country into submission. For months, the skies above southern England became a deadly battlefield. British pilots, flying the famous Spitfires and Hurricanes, fought against overwhelming odds. They were young, many barely out of school, but their courage was unmatched. Day after day, they took to the skies to defend their homeland. Churchill later said of them, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." Despite heavy losses, the Royal Air Force held firm. Germany had underestimated Britain's resolve and its radar technology, which gave them early warning of attacks. By October 1940, the Luftwaffe had lost thousands of aircraft. Hitler postponed his invasion plans. The British people had endured bombings, destruction, and death, but they had not broken. Britain would stand alone. While the world's attention focused on Europe, another theater of war was unfolding in the East. Japan, already at war with China, was expanding its control across Asia. It had occupied large parts of China and was now looking towards Southeast Asia for resources, oil, rubber, and minerals. Japan believed it was destined to dominate the region and build what it called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. But Japan's expansion soon brought it into conflict with the United States. America had large economic interests in the Pacific and supplied Japan with vital materials like oil and steel. As Japanese aggression grew, the U.S. imposed sanctions, hoping to force Japan to back down. Instead, the sanctions only hardened Japan's resolve. Its leaders decided that to secure their empire, they would have to defeat the United States. Back in Europe, Hitler's ambitions were growing beyond control. He had conquered France and much of Western Europe, but he was not satisfied. His next target was the Soviet Union. Despite their non-aggression pact, Hitler despised communism and saw the invasion of the Soviet Union as his ultimate destiny. His generals warned him that it would be a massive and dangerous undertaking, but he ignored his advice. In June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. More than 3 million German soldiers crossed the Soviet border, supported by thousands of tanks and planes. Within weeks, they captured vast territories. Soviet armies collapsed under the initial assault. Cities like Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev fell. But as the Germans advanced deeper into the Soviet Union, the resistance grew stronger. The Russians were fighting for their very survival. Hitler believed the campaign would be over in a few months. He was wrong. The vastness of the Soviet land, the harsh winter, and the determination of its people turned the tide. By the end of 1941, German troops were freezing outside the gates of Moscow. They had underestimated the strength and sacrifice of the Soviet people. Meanwhile, the United States was watching all of this unfold. Officially, America was still neutral, but it was no longer distant. Roosevelt had pushed through the Lend-Lease Act, allowing the U.S. to send weapons and supplies to Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allied nations. American factories worked day and night, producing ships, planes, and tanks. The nation was prepared.
Pearl Harbor, the day America awoke. The morning of December 7th, 1941, began like any other Sunday in the Hawaiian Islands. The sun was rising over the calm waters of Oahu. Sailors on the battleships of the United States Pacific Fleet were just waking up, some preparing for breakfast, others planning to attend church.
The air was peaceful, warm, and still. No one could have imagined that in less than 2 hours, that peace would be shattered forever. Across the Pacific Ocean, more than 3,000 miles away, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers were cutting through the waves. Their decks were lined with hundreds of fighter planes, bombers, and torpedo aircraft. Japan had prepared this attack in total secrecy. For months, Japanese intelligence officers had studied every detail of the American base at Pearl Harbor, the harbor depths, ship positions, the best times to strike. Everything was planned with precision. The Japanese government had made a choice. They believed that to conquer Asia and secure their empire, they needed to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet. If the fleet was crippled, Japan would have free rein to seize the oil-rich territories of Southeast Asia. Diplomats were still pretending to negotiate with Washington, but in truth, Japan had already chosen war. At 6 a.m., the first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft took off from their carriers north of Oahu. Their mission? Destroy the American fleet before it could fight back. At 7:48 a.m., the first bombs began to fall. The sky above Pearl Harbor exploded in fire. The attack was devastating. Within minutes, the battleship USS Arizona was struck by a massive bomb that ignited its ammunition magazines. The explosion tore the ship apart, killing more than 1,100 men in an instant. Nearby, the USS Oklahoma capsized after being hit by multiple torpedoes. Sailors trapped inside pounded desperately on the hull as the ship rolled over. The USS West Virginia, California, and Nevada were all badly damaged. The harbor filled with smoke and chaos. Planes burned on the airfields. Hangars and barracks were in flames. Men scrambled to man anti-aircraft guns, but many were caught off guard. In just 2 hours, the Japanese had destroyed or damaged nearly the entire Pacific Fleet: 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 4 destroyers. Over 180 aircraft were destroyed. More than 2,400 Americans were killed. The attack shocked the world. It was not just a military strike, it was a turning point in history. News of the attack spread across America like wildfire. Radio stations broke their regular programming to deliver the message, "The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor." President Franklin Roosevelt was informed almost immediately. His face darkened with grief and anger. The next day, December 8, 1941, he addressed Congress and the nation. His speech became one of the most famous in American history. He declared, "Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan." Congress responded with a near-unanimous vote to declare war on Japan. America, which had tried so hard to stay out of the conflict, was now fully at war. The sleeping giant had awoken. Just 3 days later, on December 11th, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, keeping their alliance with Japan. America now found itself fighting on 2 fronts, in the Pacific and in Europe. The Second World War had become truly global. The shock of Pearl Harbor united the American people like never before. Men lined up at recruitment offices, eager to enlist. Women joined factories and the armed services, taking on roles they had never held before. America's vast industrial power began to shift into full wartime production. Factories that once made cars now produced tanks, planes, and ships. The country transformed itself into an engine of war. While the United States prepared, Japan continued its rapid advance across the Pacific. Within weeks of Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces captured Guam, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. In Southeast Asia, they seized Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. The Japanese army seemed unstoppable. In the Philippines, American and Filipino troops fought bravely but were overwhelmed. General MacArthur, the commander of U.S. forces, was ordered to retreat to Australia. As he left, he made a promise to his men: "I shall return." Those who remained behind endured the brutal Bataan Death March, where thousands of prisoners were forced to walk for days without food or water under the scorching sun. Many never survived. The early months of 1942 were dark for the Allies. Japan controlled much of the Pacific. Germany dominated Europe. The Soviet Union was under siege. Britain stood alone in the West. It seemed as though the Axis powers were winning everywhere. But beneath the surface, the tide was beginning to turn. In April 1942, America struck back. 16 B-25 bombers, led by Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, took off from an aircraft carrier and bombed Tokyo and other Japanese cities. The raid caused little physical damage, but had an enormous psychological impact. It showed that Japan was not invincible, and it boosted American morale. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, a critical battle was about to unfold. In May 1942, the United States and Japan clashed in the Battle of the Coral Sea. It was the first naval battle in history fought entirely by aircraft. The opposing ships never saw each other. Though both sides suffered heavy losses, the battle stopped Japan's advance towards Australia. 1 month later came the Battle of Midway, the turning point of the Pacific War. American codebreakers had cracked Japanese communications and learned of an impending attack on the island of Midway. Forewarned, the U.S. Navy set a trap. On June 4, 1942, American dive bombers caught the Japanese fleet by surprise, sinking 4 of its aircraft carriers. The victory crippled Japan's naval strength and shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. From that moment on, Japan would be on the defensive. The United States began its long and bloody campaign to push the Japanese back, island by island. The battles of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan became symbols of sacrifice and endurance. Each victory came at a terrible cost, but America's industrial might ensured a steady flow of men, machines, and materials. While the Pacific raged, events in Europe were taking a dramatic turn. Hitler's armies had pushed deep into the Soviet Union but were beginning to falter. The winter of 1941-1942 was one of the coldest on record. German soldiers froze in their trenches, their tanks immobilized by ice. The Soviets, fighting on their own soil, refused to surrender. By late 1942, the Red Army launched a massive counterattack at Stalingrad, one of the most brutal battles in human history. The fighting was relentless, street by street, building by building. By February 1943, the German Sixth Army was surrounded and forced to surrender. It was Hitler's first major defeat. At the same time, the Allies began their counteroffensive in North Africa. British forces under General Montgomery defeated the Germans at Al Alamein, and American troops landed in Morocco and Algeria. By May 1943, the Axis powers had been driven out of Africa entirely. The momentum of the war had changed. The Allies were no longer fighting for survival, they were fighting for victory. But the cost was rising. Millions had already died. Cities lay in ruins. The war had reached every continent, every ocean, every home. In the United States, the war effort touched every aspect of life. Rationing became part of daily routine. Sugar, gasoline, and meat were limited. Posters urged people to buy war bonds, plant victory gardens, and conserve resources. Hollywood joined the cause, producing films and music that inspired patriotism and hope. Yet behind the unity, there were dark moments. Following the Pearl Harbor attack, fear and suspicion spread across America. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans, most of them U.S. citizens, were forcibly relocated to internment camps. It was one of the darkest chapters in
D-Day and the fall of Nazi Germany. By early 1944, the Allies had begun to sense the end of the long, dark tunnel. The victories in North Africa, Italy, and the Soviet Union had shifted the balance of power. Yet the heart of Nazi control still lay in Western Europe. To end the war, the Allies would have to return to the continent and defeat Germany on its own ground. That meant one enormous challenge: crossing the English Channel and invading France. The plan for this invasion was called Operation Overlord. It was the largest amphibious military operation in human history. For months, British, American, and Canadian forces gathered in southern England. Ports were filled with ships, airfields with bombers, and roads with endless convoys of supplies. Every soldier knew what lay ahead, a dangerous, uncertain assault that would decide the fate of the world. At the head of this effort stood General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of Allied forces. Calm, confident, and respected by all, Eisenhower carried the weight of millions of lives on his shoulders. The date was set for early June 1944, depending on the tides and the weather. The chosen location, the beaches of Normandy, on the northern coast of France. In the days before the invasion, Allied aircraft bombed German defenses, rail lines, and supply depots to weaken their resistance. Paratroopers practiced night drops. Soldiers wrote letters home, aware that many of them would never return. The atmosphere in England was tense but resolute. On the night of June 5, 1944, more than 5,000 ships and landing craft carrying nearly 160,000 men began to move across the channel. Thousands of aircraft filled the skies. At midnight, paratroopers jumped behind enemy lines to capture bridges and disrupt communication. Then, in the early morning hours of June 6th, the invasion began. The first wave of troops hit the beaches of Normandy at dawn. They landed at 5 code-named beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. The Germans were waiting behind concrete bunkers and machine gun nests. On Omaha Beach, the resistance was brutal. Many men were cut down before reaching the shore. But the Allies pressed on. They climbed cliffs, destroyed defenses, and fought yard by yard until the beachhead was secure. By nightfall, more than 150,000 Allied troops were on French soil. The price was high. Thousands of men had been killed or wounded, but the invasion had succeeded. The long-awaited Second Front in Europe was open. D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. In the following weeks, the Allies fought fiercely to expand their foothold in Normandy. The countryside was divided by hedgerows that turned every field into a deadly trap. German tanks and snipers made every advance costly. But the Allies had overwhelming strength in men, machines, and air power. By late July, they broke through the German lines and began racing across France. As Allied forces advanced from the west, the Soviet army was pushing from the east. The German war machine was being squeezed from both sides. In August 1944, Allied troops liberated Paris. Crowds filled the streets, waving flags and throwing flowers as French and American soldiers marched into the city. After 4 years of occupation, the lights of Paris burned bright again. Hitler's empire was collapsing, but he refused to surrender. He ordered his armies to fight to the last man. In December 1944, he launched one final desperate offensive in the west, the Battle of the Bulge. Using the cover of fog and snow, German tanks smashed into the Allied lines in Belgium's Ardennes forest, hoping to split the armies and recapture the port of Antwerp. The surprise attack caused chaos. For days, Allied forces were pushed back. Towns were surrounded, and supply lines were cut. But the weather cleared, allowing Allied aircraft to strike back. The stubborn defense of towns like Bastogne, held by American paratroopers despite being surrounded, became legendary. By January 1945, the German offensive had failed. It was their last gasp. From that point on, the Allied advance was relentless. In the east, Soviet forces crossed the Vistula River and pushed toward Berlin. In the west, American, British, and Canadian troops crossed the Rhine. German cities were bombed night and day. The once proud Third Reich was collapsing under the weight of its own destruction. Inside Germany, ordinary citizens faced unimaginable suffering. Cities lay in ruins. Food was scarce. Refugees fled from the approaching front lines. The truth about Hitler's concentration camps and the Holocaust was beginning to emerge as Allied troops liberated the first camps. What they found shocked the world. Millions of men, women, and children starved, tortured, and murdered simply because of who they were. The industrial scale of death defied comprehension. In April 1945, Soviet troops encircled Berlin. The city became a fortress of rubble and fire. Hitler, refusing to leave, hid inside his underground bunker. His generals begged him to surrender, but he raged against them, blaming everyone but himself for Germany's defeat. As the Red Army closed in, Hitler made his final decision. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life. 2 days later, Berlin fell. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. Crowds filled the streets of London, Paris, Moscow, and New York to celebrate. The war in Europe was over. After nearly 6 years of horror, the guns finally fell silent. The day became known as VE Day, Victory in Europe. But even as Europe rejoiced, the war was still raging across the Pacific. Japan refused to surrender, and the battles there were growing even bloodier. For the United States, victory in Europe was only half the journey. Before the Allies could turn their full attention to Japan, they faced another grim discovery: the true extent of Nazi crimes. As soldiers entered more concentration camps, they saw scenes of unimaginable cruelty. Survivors were skeletal and broken, surrounded by piles of bodies. The world would never forget the names of Auschwitz, Dachau, Buchenwald, and Treblinka. The Holocaust had claimed the lives of 6 million Jews and millions of others deemed enemies of the Nazi state. Humanity had witnessed the depths of evil. In the aftermath of Germany's surrender, the Allies faced enormous challenges. Europe lay in ruins. Cities were destroyed, economies shattered, and millions were homeless. Refugees wandered roads with nowhere to go. The Allies agreed to divide Germany into occupation zones: American, British, French, and Soviet, each responsible for rebuilding and maintaining order. The Nuremberg trials were held to bring Nazi leaders to justice. For the first time in history, an international tribunal prosecuted war crimes and crimes of humanity. Men who had once ruled with terror now stood in court to answer for their atrocities. The trials established a precedent that no leader could be above the law. In the United States and Britain, people celebrated victory, but mourned the terrible cost. More than 400,000 Americans had died, and countless others returned home wounded in body and spirit. Families across the world had lost fathers, sons, and brothers. But despite the grief, there was hope. Hope for a world rebuilt on freedom and cooperation, rather than conquest. Meanwhile, in Asia, the war showed no sign of ending. The battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa had proven that Japan would fight to the very end. Each island cost tens of thousands of lives. American commanders feared that an invasion of the Japanese homeland would lead to unimaginable casualties. In the background, the secret Manhattan Project was nearing completion. Scientists in New Mexico were preparing to test a weapon unlike any ever created: the atomic bomb. Its power was beyond imagination, and its use would change history forever. Back in Europe, people were trying to rebuild their lives amid the ruins. Cities like Warsaw, Dresden, and Berlin were almost completely destroyed. In Britain, bombed neighborhoods were being cleared for new housing. Across the continent, nations began to re-establish governments, rebuild industries, and care for displaced millions. The end of Nazi Germany marked the end of one of humanity's darkest chapters. Yet even in the aftermath, the seeds of a new world order were being sown. The United Nations was founded in 1945 to prevent future wars and promote peace. Countries that had once been enemies now sought cooperation. But tensions between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union were already emerging, setting the stage for a new conflict, the Cold War. For the soldiers who had fought across Europe, the memories would never fade. They remembered the beaches of Normandy, the frozen forests of Belgium, the ruined streets of Berlin. They remembered the comrades they had lost and the horrors they had seen. Many returned home to quiet lives, but the war had changed them forever. The story of D-Day and the fall of Nazi Germany is not just about military victory. It is about courage, sacrifice, and the resilience of the human spirit. It is about ordinary people doing extraordinary things to defend freedom.
The atomic end, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Japan's surrender. As the war in Europe came to an end in May 1945, the world turned its eyes to the Pacific. The Axis powers in Europe had fallen, but Japan remained defiant. Despite the destruction of its navy, the loss of its empire, and the relentless bombing of its cities, Japan's leaders refused to surrender. They believed that honor demanded resistance to the very last man. For the United States, ending the war in the Pacific had become the ultimate challenge. Every battle, every island, had shown the same grim pattern. The Japanese fought with suicidal determination. On the islands of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, entire garrisons had fought to the death rather than surrender. Civilians, driven by propaganda, often took their own lives rather than fall into American hands. The cost in human life was staggering. At Iwo Jima alone, nearly 7,000 Americans were killed, and more than 20,000 Japanese defenders died. At Okinawa, over 12,000 Americans and an estimated 100,000 Japanese soldiers and civilians perished. The closer the Allies came to Japan, the fiercer the resistance became. American commanders faced a terrible calculation. An invasion of Japan's home islands, codenamed Operation Downfall, was planned for late 1945. Military experts predicted it could cost more than 1 million Allied lives, and perhaps even more Japanese lives. It would be the bloodiest invasion in human history. But far from the battlefields, in the deserts of New Mexico, scientists had been working on something that promised to end the war by other means. The Manhattan Project, a secret research program begun in 1942, had brought together some of the world's greatest scientific minds, including Albert Einstein's theories and the leadership of physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. Their goal was to harness the energy of the atom, to build a bomb powerful enough to destroy an entire city. After years of research and immense secrecy, the first atomic device was ready for testing. On July 16, 1945, at a place called Alamogordo in New Mexico, the first atomic bomb was detonated. The explosion lit up the night sky brighter than the sun. A massive mushroom cloud rose into the heavens, and the desert shook with the force of nature itself. The world had entered a new age, the atomic age. President Harry T. Truman, who had taken office after the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt in April 1945, was informed of the bomb's success while attending the Potsdam Conference with Churchill and Stalin. The three Allied leaders were discussing the future of Europe and how to force Japan's surrender. Truman now held the most powerful weapon ever created and the heaviest responsibility imaginable. The Potsdam Declaration, issued on July 26, 1945, demanded Japan's unconditional surrender. It warned that if Japan did not yield, it would face prompt and utter destruction. The Japanese government ignored the warning. Some leaders were secretly seeking a way to end the war, but the military still controlled the country and believed it could fight on. With no sign of surrender, Truman made the decision. The atomic bomb would be used to end the war quickly and save countless lives that would be lost in a full-scale invasion. The target would be a city that had not yet been heavily bombed, one that would demonstrate the weapon's devastating power. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay took off from Tinian Island, carrying a single bomb nicknamed Little Boy. Its destination? Hiroshima, a city of 350,000 people and an important military center. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb was dropped. 43 seconds later, it exploded about 2,000 feet above the city. In an instant, Hiroshima was engulfed in blinding light and fire. The explosion released the energy of more than 15,000 tons of TNT. The temperature at the center reached thousands of degrees. Buildings disintegrated, people vanished, and the city was flattened. Within seconds, tens of thousands were dead. Fires raged across what was left. By nightfall, Hiroshima was a wasteland. Nearly 80,000 people had been killed instantly, and many more would die in the coming weeks from burns and radiation sickness. The survivors, known as Hibukasha, suffered unimaginable pain and long-term illness. The world had never seen such destruction. Even then, Japan did not surrender. The military government refused to accept defeat. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb was dropped, this time on the city of Nagasaki. The bomb, called Fat Man, was even more powerful. It exploded over the city's valleys, killing about 40,000 people instantly and leveling much of Nagasaki. That same day, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Japanese-held territories in Manchuria. Surrounded on all sides and facing total annihilation, Japan's leaders finally began to grasp the hopelessness of their situation. Emperor Hirohito, who had remained largely silent throughout the war, now stepped forward. He realized that if the war continued, Japan would cease to exist. On August 15, 1945, he addressed his nation directly over the radio, the first time the Japanese people had ever heard his voice. In a calm and sorrowful tone, he announced Japan's surrender. He told his people that continuing the war would only lead to the total extinction of human civilization. Across the world, celebrations erupted. After nearly 6 years of global conflict, the Second World War was over. On September 2nd, 1945, the formal surrender ceremony took place aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Japanese officials signed the documents of surrender before General Douglas MacArthur and representatives of the Allied powers. For the millions who had fought and suffered, the war's end brought both relief and grief. Cities lay in ruins, families had been torn apart. More than 60 million people had died. Soldiers, civilians, men, women, and children. The world would never be the same again. In Japan, the aftermath was catastrophic. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were reduced to ashes. The survivors faced radiation sickness, hunger, and homelessness. But even in the midst of ruin, the Japanese people began to rebuild. With help from the United States and under the guidance of a new democratic constitution, Japan would rise again in the decades to come as a symbol of peace and perseverance. For the United States, the use of atomic bombs raised questions that would haunt humanity forever. Was it necessary to end the war? Could there have been another way? The debate would continue for generations. What could not be denied was that the atomic bomb had changed the course of history. It had ended one war, but opened the door to a new kind of fear, the fear of nuclear destruction. The world had entered the nuclear age. The balance of power would never again be determined only by armies and navies, but by the capacity to unleash unimaginable devastation. The Cold War, a global struggle between the United States and the Soviet Union, would soon begin, fueled by the race for nuclear weapons. In the years following the war, nations sought ways to ensure that such destruction would never happen again. The United Nations was established in October 1945 to promote peace, security, and cooperation among nations.
The horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki became a constant reminder of humanity's capacity for both invention and destruction. In America, millions of soldiers returned home to a changed nation. The war had transformed the economy, society, and the global role of the United States. It had emerged as a superpower, with unmatched industrial strength and influence. The post-war years would bring prosperity, technological progress, and the challenges of leading a divided world. Meanwhile, Europe faced the monumental task of rebuilding. The Marshall Plan, launched by the United States in 1948, poured billions of dollars into the reconstruction of Europe, helping to restore economies and prevent the spread of communism. Germany was divided between East and West, symbolizing the growing divide between the democratic West and the communist East. In Asia, new nations emerged from the ashes of colonial rule. The end of the war ignited independence movements in India, Indonesia, Vietnam, and beyond. The world map was being redrawn and a new global order was taking shape. But amidst all these transformations, the memory of the war lingered. The images of concentration camps, cities turned to dust, and mushroom clouds rising over Japan left scars on the human conscience. The world had paid an unimaginable price for peace. The survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki carried their stories forward, warning future generations about the horrors of nuclear war. Scientists who had built the bomb, including Oppenheimer himself, began to question their creation. He famously said, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." His words captured the haunting realization that science had given mankind the power to destroy itself. In Japan, the rebuilding years were marked by resilience and renewal. From the ashes of war, new industries grew, cities were reconstructed, and a culture of peace took root. Hiroshima became a city dedicated to remembrance and reconciliation, a symbol of humanity's hope for a world without nuclear weapons. For the soldiers who returned from the front lines, life after the war was not easy. Many carried invisible wounds, the trauma of battle, the loss of comrades, and memories they could never erase. Yet they became the foundation of a new era, helping to build modern nations and preserve the hard-won peace.
The Aftermath and the New World Order, 1945–1950s. The Second World War had ended, but the world that emerged from its ashes was forever changed. The victory celebrations in 1945 masked a deeper truth. Humanity had entered a new age, one filled with both hope and fear. Cities lay in ruins across Europe and Asia. Millions were homeless, starving, and displaced. Entire nations had been reduced to rubble, their economies shattered, and their populations traumatized. From London to Berlin, from Warsaw to Tokyo, the scars of war were visible in every street, every broken building, and every grieving face. Yet, out of this devastation came determination, a desire to rebuild, to create something better, and to ensure that such horror would never happen again. The end of the war marked not just victory, but the beginning of a new world order. In the United States, the war had transformed the nation from an isolationist power into the undisputed leader of the free world. Its industries were untouched by bombing, its economy was booming, and its military strength had no rival. America had become a superpower. Across the Atlantic, Europe faced a very different reality. Germany was divided and occupied by the Allied powers, the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The once mighty capital, Berlin, was split into zones of control. Eastern Europe, liberated from Nazi rule, now found itself under Soviet domination. The alliance that had defeated Hitler began to crack. The unity of wartime cooperation gave way to suspicion and rivalry. The ideological divide between capitalism and communism deepened with every passing month. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, sought to expand its influence across Eastern Europe. Communist governments were installed in Poland, Hungary, Romania, and Czechoslovakia. Behind an invisible line stretching from the Baltic to the Adriatic, these nations fell under Moscow's control. Winston Churchill described this divide in 1946 with a phrase that would define an era: "An iron curtain has descended across the continent." On the other side, the United States and its Western allies promoted democracy, free markets, and reconstruction. But Europe's economies were collapsing. Without help, the continent risked falling into chaos, and perhaps, into the hands of communism. In 1948, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, named after Secretary of State George C. Marshall. It was one of the most ambitious aid programs in history. Over the next 4 years, more than $13 billion were sent to rebuild Western Europe's economies, restore trade, and prevent communist expansion. The plan worked. Within a few years, cities like Paris, Rome, and Amsterdam began to recover. Industry returned, jobs grew, and hope was rekindled. But the world was no longer united. Two opposing blocs had formed: the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the communist East, led by the Soviet Union. The Cold War had begun. This was not a war of armies clashing on battlefields, but a struggle of ideologies, influence, and power. Each side sought to prove that its system was superior: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus dictatorship. The weapons of this new conflict were propaganda, espionage, and nuclear arms. In 1949, the United States joined its allies to form the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, a military alliance designed to defend against Soviet aggression. In response, the Soviet Union would later create its own alliance, the Warsaw Pact. The world was now divided into two camps, and fear of global confrontation began to shape every decision. At the same time, new international institutions were born. In October 1945, the United Nations was established in San Francisco with the mission to promote peace, protect human rights, and prevent future wars. Its creation symbolized humanity's hope that diplomacy could succeed where war had failed. But peace remained fragile. In 1949, the Soviet Union shocked the world by successfully testing its own atomic bomb. The monopoly that the United States had held on nuclear weapons was broken. The nuclear arms race had begun. Both sides began to build more powerful weapons, capable of wiping out humanity in minutes. The tension between the superpowers grew sharper when China, after years of civil war, fell to communism in 1949. Mao Zedong and the Communist Party took control of the world's most populous nation, while the defeated nationalist government fled to Taiwan. The balance of power in Asia shifted dramatically. In the same year, Germany was officially divided into two states. In the West, the Federal Republic of Germany was established with support from the Allies. In the East, the German Democratic Republic was created under Soviet influence. Berlin, deep inside East Germany, remained a divided city, a flashpoint that would symbolize the Cold War for decades. The post-war years also saw massive changes in daily life. In America, millions of soldiers returned home to a booming economy. They built families, homes, and businesses. Suburbs spread across the nation. Consumer goods flooded the market. Cars, televisions, and household appliances became symbols of prosperity. But beneath the surface, a new anxiety took hold. The threat of nuclear war loomed over everything. Schools held duck and cover drills. Families built bomb shelters in their backyards. Governments planned for survival in a world that could be destroyed at any moment. Meanwhile, in Asia, another storm was brewing. Korea, divided at the 38th parallel after Japan's defeat, became the next battleground of the Cold War. In 1950, North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union and China, invaded the South. The United States and United Nations forces rushed to defend South Korea. The Korean War became the first major conflict of the Cold War era. It was brutal and uncertain. Cities were destroyed, millions died, and the front lines shifted back and forth with little gain. By 1953, the war ended in a stalemate, with the border almost exactly where it had begun. Korea remained divided, and still is today. The Korean War confirmed what many feared: the Cold War could easily turn hot. The world was now a global chessboard, with each superpower moving pieces to gain influence. The Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia became arenas for proxy wars and political struggles. While the United States and the Soviet Union competed for dominance, another revolution was sweeping the world: the end of colonial empires. The war had weakened Britain, France, and other European powers. In the years that followed, nations across Asia and Africa began to fight for and win their independence. India, led by Mahatma Gandhi, had already gained freedom from Britain in 1947. Indonesia broke from Dutch rule, and Vietnam began its long struggle for independence from France. The map of the world was changing rapidly. By the early 1950s, dozens of new nations were emerging, each trying to find its place in the post-war order. Some aligned with the West, others with the East, and many sought a path of neutrality, forming the beginnings of what would become the non-aligned movement. In Europe, recovery continued. Factories reopened, railways were rebuilt, and trade returned. The spirit of cooperation grew stronger. The seeds of what would later become the European Union were planted in 1951 with the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, a partnership that made future wars between France and Germany unthinkable. In Japan, under American occupation, a remarkable transformation was taking place. The old militaristic empire was replaced by a democratic government. The new constitution, written under the guidance of General Douglas MacArthur, renounced war and limited Japan's military to self-defense only. With American support, Japan's economy began to grow rapidly, laying the foundation for its future as a global powerhouse. Culturally, the world was also changing. The horrors of the war had inspired new art, literature, and philosophy. Writers and thinkers questioned morality, freedom, and the nature of power. The images of concentration camps, atomic bombs, and devastated cities left deep psychological marks on a generation. At the same time, technology was advancing at a breathtaking pace. The same scientific knowledge that had built the atomic bomb was now driving progress in medicine, engineering, and communication. Computers, jet engines, and rockets hinted at a future where human potential could reach beyond Earth itself. In the United States, the 1950s became a decade of both prosperity and paranoia. The fear of communist infiltration led to political witch hunts, most famously driven by Senator Joseph McCarthy. Accusations of disloyalty destroyed careers and deepened public anxiety. Yet, beneath the fear, innovation thrived. The American dream was stronger than ever, and the country stood at the center of global influence. In the Soviet Union, life was harsh and tightly controlled. Stalin ruled with an iron fist, suppressing dissent and enforcing obedience through fear. Millions were imprisoned or sent to labor camps. But after his death in 1953, a new phase began. The Cold War would enter a different kind of competition, one of space, technology, and ideology. By the mid-1950s, the shape of the modern world had taken form. Two superpowers stood face to face, armed with nuclear weapons capable of annihilation. Europe was divided by an invisible wall, Asia was a theater of ideological wars, and Africa and the Middle East were awakening from colonial rule. Yet, despite the tension, humanity moved forward. Nations rebuilt, societies healed, and dreams of peace persisted. The lessons of the Second World War, the cost of hatred, the power of unity, and the fragility of civilization, continued to guide a generation that had survived the unthinkable. The world of the late 1940s and 1950s was one of contrasts, prosperity and poverty, fear and hope, destruction and creation. It was an era when humanity stood on the edge of annihilation, yet dared to reach for the stars. The guns had fallen silent, but the shadow of war remained. The New World Order was not built on peace alone, it was balanced on the thin line between freedom and fear, courage and caution, power and restraint. And as the world entered the second half of the 20th century, one question remained: did humanity learn from its past, or was it destined to repeat the same mistakes again? The Cold War heats up, the space race, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Vietnam War. By the early 1960s, the world was living under the shadow of the Cold War. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, stood locked in a global struggle that stretched from the icy Arctic to the jungles of Asia. It was a conflict fought not with open armies, but through spies, propaganda, technology, and fear. The weapons were ready, the ideologies were clear, and the entire planet had become their battleground. After World War II, both nations had rushed to build bigger and deadlier nuclear weapons. The United States had used atomic bombs to end the war, but by the 1950s, the Soviets had not only caught up, they had gone further. They tested the hydrogen bomb, a weapon 1,000 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. For the first time, both sides had the power to destroy the world. This terrifying balance became known as mutually assured destruction. It meant that if one side launched its nuclear weapons, the other would respond, and both would be annihilated. Peace, ironically, was maintained by the fear of total destruction. But the Cold War was not only about weapons. It was also a battle for pride, progress, and the future of humanity itself. Science became the new battlefield, and space was the prize. In 1957, the Soviet Union stunned the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, into orbit. The tiny metal sphere circled the Earth every 96 minutes, sending a simple radio signal that echoed across the planet. To the Soviets, it was proof of their scientific superiority. To the Americans, it was a wake-up call, a signal that they were falling behind. The launch of Sputnik began the space race, a fierce competition to conquer the heavens. The United States poured billions into science and education, creating new agencies like NASA. Schools across America began emphasizing math and science, hoping to produce the next generation of engineers and astronauts. Just 4 years later, the Soviet Union achieved another milestone. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin, a 27-year-old pilot, became the first human to travel into space. He orbited the Earth once and returned safely, instantly becoming a hero. The world cheered, but in Washington, it was a moment of deep concern. The U.S. could not afford to lose the race for the future. President John F. Kennedy, a young and charismatic leader, took up the challenge. In a bold speech at Rice University in 1962, he declared, "We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard." With those words, the United States committed itself to landing a man on the moon before the decade's end. The dream of space exploration became a symbol of hope, unity, and human achievement. But while the competition in space inspired awe, events on Earth brought the world dangerously close to destruction. In 1959, a revolution in Cuba changed the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere. A young revolutionary named Fidel Castro overthrew the US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista. Soon after taking power, Castro aligned himself with the Soviet Union, turning Cuba into a communist state just 90 miles from American shores. The United States was alarmed. In 1961, American-trained Cuban exiles launched an invasion at the Bay of Pigs, hoping to overthrow Castro. The mission was a disaster. The invading force was defeated within days, embarrassing the US government and pushing Cuba even closer to the Soviet Union. Then, in October 1962, the world came closer to nuclear war than ever before. US spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba. These missiles could strike American cities in minutes. For 13 tense days, the world held its breath. The Cuban Missile Crisis began. President Kennedy demanded that the Soviet Union remove the missiles immediately and ordered a naval blockade around Cuba to prevent further deliveries. Soviet ships carrying missiles steamed toward the blockade. The US military went on high alert. In Washington and Moscow, leaders exchanged secret messages. Any misstep could trigger a nuclear war. At one point, a Soviet submarine commander, believing war had begun, almost launched a nuclear torpedo. The decision of one officer to hold back may have saved the world. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of unbearable tension, a deal was struck. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba in exchange for a US promise not to invade the island, and a secret agreement to remove American missiles from Turkey. The crisis ended, but the fear remained. The world had looked into the abyss and realized how close it was to destruction. The Cuban Missile Crisis became a turning point in the Cold War. Both sides began to realize that communication, not confrontation, might be the only way to avoid annihilation. A direct hotline between Washington and Moscow was established, and treaties to limit nuclear weapons began to take shape. But the Cold War was far from over. The battle had simply shifted to new fronts: Asia, Africa, and beyond. In Southeast Asia, a small country called Vietnam was about to become the next major conflict of the Cold War. After World War II, Vietnam, which had been a French colony, declared independence under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, a communist revolutionary. But France refused to let go, and the First Indochina War broke out. In 1954, the Vietnamese defeated the French at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, forcing France to withdraw. Vietnam was then divided into two countries, the Communist North Vietnam led by Ho Chi Minh, and the anti-communist South Vietnam supported by the United States. At first, America's involvement was limited to sending advisors and equipment. But by the early 1960s, the US feared that if South Vietnam fell to communism, other countries in Asia would follow, a belief known as the domino theory. President Kennedy increased military aid, and after his assassination in 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson escalated the conflict further. By 1965, hundreds of thousands of American soldiers were fighting in Vietnam. The Vietnam War was unlike anything the US had faced before. The dense jungles, the guerrilla tactics of the Viet Cong, and the determination of the North Vietnamese army turned the conflict into a nightmare. The US dropped millions of tons of bombs, sprayed chemical defoliants like Agent Orange, and fought fierce battles in places like Khe Sanh and Hue. But the enemy never gave up. Despite overwhelming firepower, victory remained elusive. Back home, the war divided America. Millions of young men were drafted to fight a war they did not understand or support. Protests erupted across the nation. College campuses filled with chants of, "Make love, not war." The anti-war movement became a powerful force, fueled by television images of burning villages, body bags, and suffering civilians. For the first time in history, people could watch the war unfold live on their television screens. Public opinion began to turn against the government. Many questioned why America was fighting in a distant land with no clear end in sight. As the years dragged on, the toll grew heavier. More than 58,000 American soldiers lost their lives. Millions of Vietnamese, soldiers and civilians alike, were killed. Villages were destroyed, forests burned, and the land itself was scarred by war. In 1968, after the Tet Offensive, a massive surprise attack by North Vietnamese forces, it became clear that the war could not be won easily. American morale crumbled. President Johnson, exhausted and unpopular, chose not to seek re-election. In 1969, a new president, Richard Nixon, came to power with a promise to achieve peace with honor. He began withdrawing U.S. troops and shifting responsibility to the South Vietnamese, a policy known as Vietnamization. At the same time, Nixon expanded the war secretly into neighboring Cambodia and Laos, bombing enemy supply routes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. These actions sparked even more protests and outrage, especially after the Kent State shootings in 1970, where National Guard troops killed 4 student demonstrators. Finally, after years of negotiations, the Paris Peace Accords were signed in 1973. American troops withdrew, and 2 years later, in 1975, Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam, fell to the communist forces of the North. For the United States, Vietnam was a painful lesson. It had entered the war to stop communism but left with deep wounds, both physical and psychological. The nation had lost trust in its leaders and confidence in its global role. For Vietnam, the war left a legacy of devastation, poverty, and division that would last for decades. The Cold War, however, continued. Despite moments of tension and near disaster, neither side dared to push too far again. The world had seen what brinkmanship could bring. The arms race went on, and the competition for influence spread into every corner of the globe, in Africa, the Middle East, and even outer space. The space race reached its peak in 1969, when the United States achieved the impossible. On July 20, the Apollo 11 mission landed the first humans on the moon. As Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, his words echoed around the world. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." With that, America won the space race, a moment of triumph that symbolized human achievement and national pride. Yet even as humanity reached the stars, it remained trapped by the fears and rivalries of Earth. The Cold War had reshaped the world, dividing it not only politically and militarily but emotionally. It had become a battle for the soul of humanity, between freedom and control, hope and fear, progress and destruction. By the end of the 1970s, the Cold War was far from over. The world had survived the Cuban Missile Crisis, endured the Vietnam War, and reached the moon. But the tensions remained, the weapons stayed armed, and the shadow of conflict stretched into the future. The end of World War II and America's new beginning. By the spring of 1945, the world was on the verge of dramatic change. The Nazi regime that had once controlled nearly all of Europe was collapsing. Its armies were broken, its cities were destroyed, and its people were starving. The Allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union, were closing in from every direction. Hitler's dream of a global German empire was ending in flames. In April 1945, American and Soviet forces met at the Elbe River in Germany. The moment was symbolic, East and West finally united against a common enemy. German cities like Berlin, Dresden, and Hamburg were reduced to rubble. The once proud Nazi army now consisted of boys and old men, fighting hopelessly to defend a lost cause. Inside a bunker beneath the streets of Berlin, Adolf Hitler realized the inevitable. The war he started had consumed everything: his armies, his allies, and his nation. On April 30, 1945, he took his own life, ending an era of madness and terror. Within days, Germany officially surrendered. Europe was free again, but at an unimaginable cost: more than 50 million lives lost. For the people of Europe, the war's end brought both joy and sorrow. Families reunited, prisoners were liberated, but millions had no homes to return to. Entire cities had to be rebuilt from nothing. The scars of war were not only physical, they were deeply emotional. Mothers, widows, and orphans filled the streets, searching for loved ones who would never return. In the United States, the reaction was mixed. There was celebration in the streets, parades, flags, and tears of relief. After years of sacrifice, Americans could finally say that victory had been achieved. Yet the war was not truly over. Across the Pacific Ocean, Japan continued to fight with unwavering determination. Despite Germany's surrender, American soldiers still faced brutal combat on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Each battle was a nightmare, thousands died in days. Japanese soldiers refused to surrender, they fought to the last man. Even civilians were trained to defend their homeland with sticks and stones if necessary. By mid-1945, U.S. military leaders knew that a full invasion of Japan could cost millions of lives. President Harry S. Truman, who had taken office after Roosevelt's death in April, faced a decision that would change human history forever. America had developed a new weapon, one more powerful than anything the world had ever seen. It was called the atomic bomb. Truman's advisors told him that using this weapon could force Japan to surrender without an invasion. But they also warned him that its destruction would be unimaginable. After long discussions and moral debates, the decision was made. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber named Enola Gay flew over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. At 8:15 a.m., it dropped the world's first atomic bomb. Within seconds, the city disappeared in fire. Tens of thousands of people were killed instantly. The world had entered the nuclear age. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The devastation was beyond comprehension. On August 15, 1945, Japan finally surrendered. The Second World War was over. For the first time in 6 years, peace returned to the world. The guns fell silent, the soldiers came home, and the dead were mourned. But nothing would ever be the same again. The United States emerged from the war as the most powerful nation on earth. Its economy was booming, its industries were untouched by bombing, and its military strength was unmatched. While Europe and Asia lay in ruins, America stood tall, a symbol of freedom and democracy. Yet with great power came great responsibility. In the months following the war, American leaders realized that the peace they fought for could easily disappear. The Soviet Union, once an ally, was now becoming a rival. Its influence spread across Eastern Europe, while the United States led the rebuilding of Western Europe through a plan called the Marshall Plan. Billions of dollars in aid helped revive European industries and prevent the spread of communism. The world quickly divided into two camps: the Democratic West, led by the United States, and the Communist East, led by the Soviet Union. This new rivalry would define global politics for decades. It was not fought with guns and tanks, but with ideas, influence, and fear. Historians called it the Cold War. At home, the American people tried to return to normal life. Soldiers reunited with their families, women who had worked in factories during the war returned home, and the country entered a period of prosperity. Suburbs grew, cars filled the roads, and television became a new form of entertainment. Yet the memory of war never completely faded. Every veteran carried silent memories, of friends lost, of battles fought, of moments they could never forget. The victory in World War II transformed America's identity. Before the war, the nation had been largely isolated, focused on its own affairs. After the war, the United States became the defender of democracy, a global superpower, and a beacon of hope for nations rebuilding their lives. But that new role also brought challenges. The nuclear bomb had ended one war, but it had also opened the door to new fears of total destruction. The same technology that brought victory also threatened humanity itself. In the years that followed, America's leaders struggled to balance power with peace, technology with ethics, and victory with responsibility. The war also changed society in profound ways. Women had entered the workforce in large numbers, proving their strength and capability. African American soldiers who fought overseas began demanding equal rights at home, planting the seeds of the civil rights movement. The world had seen the horrors of genocide in the Nazi concentration camps, reminding humanity of the importance of compassion and justice. For millions of people, the end of the war was a chance to rebuild, to dream again, and to start new lives. For the United States, it was the beginning of a new era, one of leadership, innovation, and moral testing. The generation that fought the war became known as the Greatest Generation. They built modern America, its economy, its military, its ideals. In the decades that followed, the world would continue to change. Korea, Vietnam, the space race, and the Cold War tensions would shape a new chapter of history. But it was in the fires of World War II that America's destiny was forged. It rose from isolation to leadership, from uncertainty to confidence, and from tragedy to triumph. The war had shown both the best and the worst of humanity. It revealed courage, sacrifice, and unity, but also cruelty and destruction. And from those ashes, a new world was born, one where the United States would stand as the symbol of freedom for generations to come. As the veterans returned home and the world tried to heal, one truth became clear. Peace is fragile, freedom is precious, and history must never be forgotten. The story of World War II is not just the story of armies and nations, it is the story of people, of hope, and of the eternal struggle between tyranny and liberty. And for America, it was the moment that defined who it truly was, not just a country, but an idea. An idea that would go on to shape the future of the entire world. The legacy of World War II and the American century. The end of World War II marked not only the close of the deadliest conflict in history but also the birth of a new global era, the American century. The United States entered this period not just as a victor but as a nation transformed. Its soldiers returned as heroes, its industries stood as symbols of strength, and its ideals became the foundation for a new world order. The war had tested the limits of human endurance, and America had emerged from the struggle with a deeper sense of identity and purpose. In the years that followed, the world looked to the United States for leadership. Europe and Asia were rebuilding, and people everywhere searched for direction. American policies, ideas, and culture began to shape almost every aspect of modern life, from politics and economics to science and art. The country that once preferred isolation now stood at the center of global affairs. The first challenge was to prevent another global catastrophe. American diplomats helped establish the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. These institutions were designed to create stability and cooperation. The lesson of the 1930s was clear: when nations turn inward, chaos spreads. So America chose engagement, building partnerships and helping others recover. At home, the nation experienced rapid transformation. Returning veterans used the GI Bill to go to college, buy homes, and start families. The 1950s saw an explosion of innovation. Television connected households, automobiles reshaped cities, and new technologies born from wartime research fueled the economy. American industry led the world in production and invention. Every sign pointed toward a future of progress and confidence. But the legacy of war also carried unseen burdens. The nuclear age brought a constant awareness of danger. The same technology that had ended the war also had the potential to end civilization. As tensions rose between the United States and the Soviet Union, a new kind of conflict began, one fought through influence, fear, and the race for supremacy. This Cold War defined the second half of the 20th century. From Berlin to Korea, from Cuba to Vietnam, the two superpowers competed for control and ideology. America's mission to defend democracy expanded across continents. The space race became a symbol of this struggle, pushing technology and imagination to their limits. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon in 1969, It was more than a victory in science, it was proof that freedom and determination could reach beyond Earth itself. Yet at the same time, the war's social legacy reshaped the nation's conscience. The ideals America had fought for abroad, liberty, equality, and justice, were now demanded at home. African American veterans and activists called for the rights they had defended overseas. The civil rights movement gained momentum, leading to profound legal and cultural changes. The women who had worked in factories and offices during the war sought permanent equality in the workplace and in society. The 1960s became an age of transformation, born from the promises made 2 decades earlier. World War II had also created a new relationship between citizens and government. Mass production, scientific research, and military readiness became permanent parts of national life. The defense industry grew, universities expanded, and technology advanced faster than ever before. Computers, jet travel, medical breakthroughs, and new communication systems all traced their roots to wartime innovation. Every household began to feel the influence of a world that was moving faster, smaller, and more connected. Culturally, the war left an enduring imprint on American identity. Stories of bravery and sacrifice filled books, films, and classrooms. Hollywood turned real battles into powerful narratives that celebrated courage and human spirit. The generation that had fought became role models for duty and honor. Their example inspired later generations through new struggles and crises. Internationally, America's presence became synonymous with modernity. Through diplomacy, aid, and culture, it helped rebuild allies and reshape the global order. The Marshall Plan, NATO, and partnerships with nations in Asia and the Middle East created a network of influence unmatched in history. The dollar became the world's standard currency. English became the language of trade and science. And American values, democracy, innovation, and individual rights, became the aspirations of millions. However, power also brought criticism and responsibility. Not every action matched the ideals America stood for. The Vietnam War, foreign interventions, and internal divisions reminded the world that no nation is immune to error. The legacy of World War II required constant reflection, a balance between defending freedom and respecting it. The same moral questions that arose in 1945 continued to challenge every generation that followed. By the end of the 20th century, the Cold War had ended without nuclear disaster. The Soviet Union collapsed, and the United States stood again as the leading power in a globalized world. The world economy grew more interconnected, and technology transformed communication. But the lessons of World War II remained as relevant as ever. Peace requires vigilance, and prosperity requires cooperation. In schools across the country, children continued to learn about the war, not as distant history, but as the foundation of the modern age. Veterans became storytellers, ensuring that the sacrifices of the past would never be forgotten. Memorials were built in Washington, D.C., Normandy, and across the Pacific, standing as silent reminders of courage and loss. The moral legacy of the war was perhaps its most important gift. It forced the world to confront the horrors of hatred and genocide. It led to the creation of international laws protecting human rights. And it inspired a collective belief that freedom is worth defending, even at great cost. In science and technology, the war's impact continued to ripple outward. Advances in aviation, medicine, and computing formed the basis of modern civilization. What had once been tools of conflict became engines of progress. Satellites, the internet, and global communication all grew from the seeds planted in those wartime laboratories. The influence of World War II even shaped the 21st century. Modern alliances, international organizations, and global security structures all trace their origins to the post-war years. The way nations trade, negotiate, and respond to crises still reflects lessons learned from that era. Every modern debate about freedom, justice, or leadership carries echoes of 1945. For America, the memory of the war remains deeply personal. It is seen in the faces of veterans on national holidays, in the parades of remembrance, and in the quiet pride of families who still honor those who served. It is felt in the nation's faith in democracy, its belief in equality, and its conviction that leadership must always serve humanity, not dominate it. The American century that followed World War II was not perfect, but it was built on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom. It proved that unity can overcome despair, that innovation can follow tragedy, and that ideals can survive even the darkest of times. From the beaches of Normandy to the islands of the Pacific, from the ruins of Europe to the skyscrapers of New York, the story of that generation continues to guide the world. As the 21st century moves forward, new challenges will arise, conflicts, crises, and divisions. But the spirit that carried America through World War II endures. It lives in the belief that freedom is not a gift, but a responsibility, that peace must be protected, not assumed, and that progress is possible only when nations remember their past. World War II was not only a chapter in history. It was a mirror reflecting both the potential for destruction and the capacity for renewal within humanity. For America, it defined an identity, strong yet compassionate, powerful yet principled, ambitious yet aware of its duty to others. More than 75 years later, the echoes of that war still shape the present. Every advance in science, every alliance, every act of global cooperation can trace its lineage back to the moment when nations stood together against tyranny. The war's survivors have grown old, but their legacy is written in the freedom billions enjoy today. And so, the story of World War II is not over. It continues every time a soldier defends peace, every time a scientist discovers something new, every time a leader chooses diplomacy over war. The lessons live on, carried forward by those who understand that history is not just about remembering the past, but about guiding the future. In the final measure, the legacy of World War II is the story of humanity's resilience. It reminds the world that out of unimaginable destruction can come unity, courage, and hope. And for America, it remains the moment that defined its soul, the moment when the nation rose not only to defend itself but to defend the idea that liberty and justice belong to all. When the guns of World War II finally went silent in 1945, the world entered a new age. The war had destroyed empires, redrawn borders, and taken more lives than any conflict before it. But from the ashes of that destruction, a new global order emerged, one led by the United States of America. Before the war, America had been a nation focused inward. It was a land of opportunity and freedom, but its influence rarely stretched beyond its shores. The war changed that forever. When the fighting ended, America stood unmatched, its economy strong, its cities untouched, and its people united by sacrifice and purpose. The United States had become more than just a country. It was now the center of power, technology, and culture in the modern world. But victory came with responsibility. Millions around the world looked to America for hope, leadership, and moral direction. And from that moment on, every decision made in Washington would shape the destiny of the planet. In the immediate years after 1945, the world faced a new kind of tension. The old enemies were gone, but a new rivalry began, between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was not a war of armies, but a battle of ideas. The world was divided between democracy and communism, freedom and control, capitalism and state power. This period became known as the Cold War. It began quietly, with words, not weapons, but it soon turned into a race for influence across the globe. Each side built alliances, gathered intelligence, and developed nuclear weapons powerful enough to destroy the planet. The fear of another world war hung over every generation. But America's leaders knew that strength alone was not enough. They needed to rebuild the world, not just protect it. Through the Marshall Plan, the United States sent billions of dollars to Europe to rebuild cities, factories, and economies destroyed by the war. The plan was not just about money, it was about preventing the return of chaos and dictatorship. It helped turn enemies into allies and gave rise to the modern Western alliance that still exists today. In Asia, the US also took a leading role. Japan, once America's fiercest enemy, became a close partner. Under American supervision, Japan built a new democratic constitution, focused on peace and industry rather than war. In the following decades, Japan became one of the strongest economies in the world, a symbol of what could be achieved through cooperation instead of conquest. The war had also changed technology forever. During the conflict, scientists developed radar, jet engines, computers, and the atomic bomb. After the war, these technologies transformed daily life. Air travel became faster, medicine improved, computers began to appear in universities and laboratories. And in 1958, the United States created NASA, launching a new era of exploration that would eventually take humans to the moon. But while the world celebrated progress, America faced challenges at home. Millions of soldiers returned, eager to start new lives. The government helped them through programs like the GI Bill, which offered education and housing. Suburbs began to spread, highways expanded, and a new middle class was born. The 1950s became an age of prosperity and optimism. Yet beneath the surface, there were deep social changes waiting to unfold. During the war, African American soldiers had fought bravely for freedom overseas, but returned to a country where segregation and discrimination still existed. Their experiences gave new energy to the fight for civil rights. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. would soon rise, inspired by the ideals of liberty that America had defended in the war. Women, too, were changed forever. Millions had worked in factories, offices, and military roles. During the war, they proved that they were just as capable as men. After 1945, many refused to return quietly to traditional roles. Their struggle for equality would grow stronger over the next decades, shaping the modern American identity. The United Nations was created in 1945, another product of the lessons of war. The United States played a key role in its formation. Its purpose was to maintain peace, promote cooperation, and prevent future conflicts. Though not perfect, the UN symbolized a new hope, that nations could solve problems through dialogue instead of violence. As the years passed, the influence of World War II continued to echo through every corner of American life. The Cold War pushed the U.S. to innovate, creating new industries, new technologies, and new frontiers. The space race, the computer revolution, and the rise of global trade all had their roots in the lessons learned from the war. Culturally, the war also changed how Americans saw themselves. It united people of different backgrounds, immigrants, farmers, factory workers, and soldiers, under one flag and one purpose. That sense of unity became part of the American spirit. Movies, books, and documentaries kept the memory of sacrifice alive, reminding each new generation of what freedom truly costs. But the war also left a deep shadow. The atomic bomb had ended one conflict, but it also created a world of fear. For decades, Americans lived under the threat of nuclear war. Children practiced safety drills in schools, families built bomb shelters, and politicians debated how to maintain peace without surrendering strength. The Cold War tested America's leadership as much as World War II had tested its courage. Despite these tensions, the values that guided the U.S. through World War II, freedom, democracy, and resilience, continued to define it. The war had proven that when Americans stood together, they could overcome any challenge. That lesson carried through every crisis that followed, from Korea and Vietnam to the struggle for civil rights and the race to space. By the end of the 20th century, much of the world that had been rebuilt under American leadership had become prosperous and free. Germany and Japan, once enemies, became strong allies. Europe enjoyed peace for generations. And the United States remained a symbol of hope for nations seeking democracy. The legacy of World War II was not just military victory, it was the creation of a world built on cooperation, reconstruction, and shared values. It showed humanity both its darkest and brightest sides, from the horror of the Holocaust to the triumph of rebuilding peace. America carried those lessons forward, determined never to repeat the mistakes of the past. In the 21st century, as new challenges arise, terrorism, climate change, economic shifts, the lessons of World War II remain vital. They remind Americans that leadership is not about power alone. It is about responsibility, compassion, and the courage to defend what is right. Every generation since 1945 has lived in the world shaped by that war. The highways, the alliances, the technology, the prosperity, all trace their roots to those 6 years of global conflict. The sacrifices of millions ensured a better future for billions. For the United States, the war was a turning point, the moment it became the guardian of global freedom. And though decades have passed, the spirit of those who fought still lives on, in the nation's values, its progress, and its promise. World War II was not just history. It was the foundation of the modern world, and the story of how America became what it is today. It taught one timeless truth: that peace is earned through unity, freedom must be defended through courage, and history must always be remembered, so that the mistakes of yesterday never become the tragedies of tomorrow.